Good evening. Tonight, we have a story about family, secrets, and a single dinner that changed everything. We're glad to have you here. Let's begin. Olivia Hayes got married in early June, the day the hydrangeas were in full bloom and the neighbor's mother-in-law was sipping valerian drops straight from the bottle. Perhaps it was out of joy for the newlyweds, or perhaps a premonition that the wedding next door would not end well. Olivia decided then that it wasn't a sign. It was just the neighbor's mother-in-law. 3 years later, she remembered that day with a special feeling, a mix of tenderness and a slight dizziness, like from a swing pushed a little harder than needed. Ethan Reed was an architect, not in the sense of sketching houses in a notebook, but in the sense of knowing how space should be arranged, and how everyone else was doing it wrong. He could spend half an hour explaining why kitchen cabinets should be positioned differently, yet be unable to hang a shelf straight. Olivia loved him for precisely this, his ability to see the world better structured than it actually was. Such people are rare. Such people are usually missed most when the shelf finally falls. Olivia herself worked as a journalist for the Metropolitan Ledger, not one of those papers that reports on playground openings and awards ceremonies for choir veterans. She worked for one that sometimes found interesting stories where no one thought to look. Chief editor Arthur Sterling, a stocky man with a perpetually unbuttoned second shirt button and a habit of speaking softly when angry and loudly when pleased, simply said of her, "Hayes has a nose for a story." Olivia didn't object. A nose for news was a professional tool. Eleanor Reed arrived in their lives with the regularity of an IRS audit and roughly the same level of joy upon her visit. A woman of about 65, with a perfectly coiffed silver bob and the expression of someone who knew everything was being done incorrectly and was only silent out of sheer politeness. Olivia respected her mother-in-law. It wasn't easy, but she tried. Eleanor Reed was the widow of a decorated Marine Corps engineer, raised Ethan alone, worked for 30 years as a senior financial analyst, and had a strong opinion on absolutely everything, including how Olivia made pot roast, folded towels, and answered phone calls. "You slice your carrots too thin for the pot roast," Eleanor once said, observing Olivia's cooking with the air of a judge at a diving competition. "They should be diced, for substance." "That's how I'm used to doing it," Olivia replied mildly. "Habits are not traditions, Olivia." Olivia remained silent. Silence was also a professional skill. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a brownstone building. Ethan had chosen it himself, painstakingly and meticulously, with printed floor plans and a ruler, a 2-bedroom but spacious, with a good layout and a balcony where they drank coffee on weekends and talked about various things, his projects, her articles, how nice it would be to finally go to the coast. These were the best hours of the week. That Friday, which marked the beginning of everything, Olivia returned home later than usual. The newsroom was working on a story about peculiar financial dealings within a major real estate development firm. It sounded dull, but boring words sometimes hid very exciting stories. Olivia knew this better than anyone in the office. Ethan was in the kitchen with his phone. Seeing his wife, he quickly slipped it into his pocket, but not so quickly that it went unnoticed. "Mom called," he said. "And what now?" "She wants to host a family dinner. Next Saturday. Says we need to get together." Get together meant the two of them, her and Aunt Carol, plus Kevin with his fiancée, Brenda. Marcus Miller was Ethan's friend from college, a good-natured man with a neatly trimmed beard and a perpetual mug of tea in his hand. A structural engineer, quiet and dependable. His wife, Dr. Sarah Miller, was a pediatrician and viewed the world with that professional calm developed after many years of interacting with small children and their anxious parents. "Dinner, then dinner," Olivia said, taking off her jacket. "Just no pot roast from me this time." Ethan smiled, but it was a crooked, half-hearted smile. Olivia noticed. Her journalistic nose worked at home, too, and there was no escaping it. "Something else?" she asked. "No, everything's fine." Fine was spoken in the tone of someone for whom nothing was fine, but who hadn't yet decided whether to talk about it now or wait for a convenient moment, which, as everyone knows, never arrives on its own. Olivia didn't press. She knew how to wait. Sometimes silence extracts more than the most precise questions. The next day, she arrived at the office and immediately opened the folder with materials on the construction company. The company was called Apex Developments, which itself was slightly ironic given her husband's profession. The owner was a certain Julian Thorne, 52. Divorced, with interests in several related entities. Successful, according to documents. But the documents had been behaving strangely lately. Figures didn't reconcile. Contractors complained about delays, and one foreman told Olivia in a hushed voice during a chance encounter, "Something's fishy there, but I'm not involved." Olivia wrote it down. She always wrote things down. Arthur Sterling entered with coffee and the air of a man bearing news. Hayes, question. Listening. Are you familiar with Reed, the architect? Olivia looked up from the screen. He's my husband. The editor slowly placed his mug on the desk, thinking, then this is more interesting than I thought. What exactly? Apex Developments signed a contract with Reed and Associates 3 months ago. A big project. I have the documents. Want to take a look? Olivia looked at him for exactly 5 seconds, then stood up. I do. The folder was thin, maybe 20 pages, no more. But thin folders could be heavier than thick ones. Olivia had learned this long ago, in her second year at the paper, when an inconspicuous envelope with 3 pages inside turned into a case that the whole city discussed for 6 months. She leafed through it silently. Arthur Sterling didn't interfere. He sat opposite, stirring his coffee with a spoon, though he never added sugar. Just a habit of doing something with his hands, when thinking. The contract between Apex Developments and Reed and Associates was signed in October. The project, a suburban development with 7 buildings. The design fee was listed separately, substantial. Olivia didn't consider herself an expert in architectural service pricing, but the figure looked rounded, too perfectly rounded, as if it hadn't been calculated but invented. Following were appendices, budget, technical specifications, a list of approvals, and a separate sheet with a printout of correspondence. Not all of it, just fragments. Someone had clearly selected them. One fragment was underlined in red marker. Not by Arthur. Apparently the folder had arrived with the underlining already there. It read, as agreed, funding will pass through an affiliated entity. Details upon meeting. Regards, J.T. Julian Thorne. Olivia placed the sheet on the table. Carefully, as one handles something fragile. Where did this come from? She asked evenly. The source prefers anonymity. It came to the general inquiries inbox, but it was professionally done, with explanations, with a structure, not a random person. What kind of affiliated entity? That's what's interesting. Apex Developments incorporated a subsidiary 7 months ago. Blueprint Innovations. A single employee. Registered at an address where a discount shoe outlet is located. Convenient, Olivia said. Very. And here's what's noteworthy. Through Blueprint Innovations, payments were made to several contractors, including advances for projects for which permits haven't yet been issued. So, money moved before construction was even approved. Precisely. Olivia stood and walked to the window. Below, ordinary life proceeded. Cars, pedestrians, pigeons, engrossed in their pigeon affairs. Nothing indicated that somewhere in this tranquil life, her husband had signed a contract with a man whose money resided in a shoe store. Does Ethan know who they're working with? She asked, without turning around. That's what I wanted to ask you. I didn't know about this contract. A pause. Arthur Sterling put down his mug. Completely, Olivia confirmed. It was true. Ethan talked about work in general terms. A new client, an interesting project, good terms. She hadn't asked for details. Her nose worked at the paper. But at home, she tried to switch off her professional mode. She tried. Hayes, the editor said softly. You understand you have a conflict of interest. I understand. And that I need you to work on this? I understand that too. She tucked the folder under her arm. Give me until Wednesday. Olivia returned home at 7 that day. Ethan was making dinner, sautéing potatoes, which he rarely did and always with excessive enthusiasm, adding spices. The potatoes probably wished they'd never met. How was your day? He asked. Worky. Olivia hung up her bag and, as if casually, added, "Tell me about the new project, the one you took on in October." Ethan turned around. Spatula in hand, his face showed a momentary and almost imperceptible pause. "Oh, a residential development, 7 buildings, a serious commission. Why? Who's the client?" "Apex Developments, Julian Thorne, the owner. Good guy, to the point, pays on time." "Did you vet the company, Ethan?" "Olivia, what are you interrogating me for?" "I'm talking," she said calmly. "You're answering in short phrases and holding that spatula like a shield." Ethan looked at the spatula, then placed it on the edge of the stovetop. "I vetted them," he said. "Our lawyer reviewed the documents. Everything's clean. What about affiliated entities?" The pause grew longer. The potatoes began to burn. "How do you know about affiliated entities?" "Ethan, I'm a journalist." He took the pan off the heat, sat at the table. Olivia sat opposite him, not next to him. It was important where one sat in such moments. "A month ago, Thorne suggested we change the payment structure," Ethan finally said. "Part of the advance went through another company. He explained it as tax efficiency. I asked our lawyer, and the lawyer said it was formally within legal parameters." Formally and within parameters were 2 phrases that, together, meant but there are nuances. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I know. That's why I felt off yesterday. You could have told me." "Could have." He paused. "Didn't want to burden you. You have your own work." "My work right now is your contract," Olivia said quietly. Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" "Exactly that. The ledger is investigating Apex Developments. Arthur showed me the documents this morning. I didn't know you were involved. Now I do." The silence in the kitchen shifted, becoming thick, thoughtful. "What are you going to do?" Ethan finally asked. "I don't know yet," Olivia answered honestly. "But first, I need to understand what's really happening. Do you think I'm blaming you for something?" She looked at him, at the man who, 7 years ago, had approached her at a stranger's birthday party and said, "This apartment is poorly arranged." At the man who still couldn't hammer a shelf straight, but believed space could be made better. "No," she said. "But I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. And one more thing." "What?" "Call Thorne tomorrow. Tell him you want to meet, as if for work matters. See his reaction." Ethan looked at his wife with an expression that conveyed something like, "I married a journalist, but I live with a private investigator." "All right," he said. "And we'll have to throw out the potatoes," Olivia added. "They're burnt." Saturday morning, Ethan called Thorne at 10:15. Olivia sat in the kitchen with her coffee, pretending to read something on her phone. In reality, she was listening. "Julian Thorne, good morning." Ethan Reed calling. "I'd like to meet this week. I have questions about the second phase of the technical specifications." A pause. "Yes, exactly. Better in person. There are diagrams we need to look at." Another pause. Longer. "Of course." Agreed. Ethan put the phone on the table, looked at Olivia. "What?" she asked. He agreed immediately. "No clarifications. No, let's do next week or I'll check my schedule. Just Tuesday, 2 p.m., my office address." "And that worried you?" "Business people don't agree that fast," Ethan said. "Business people always say they're busy first." Olivia lowered her phone. "So, he was either expecting your call or he's nervous. It's the same thing." She wrote the meeting time in a paper notebook, old-fashioned, gifted to her by Arthur Sterling 3 years ago with the inscription on the first page. "Good reporters don't trust the cloud." Olivia had laughed then. Now she used it. On Sunday, Eleanor called. Olivia answered because Ethan was in the shower, and the phone was insistently vibrating on the nightstand, looking like it had something important to say. "Olivia," her mother-in-law's voice said, a tone that theoretically meant hello, but practically meant let's begin. "Good morning, Eleanor. About Saturday. Will you be cooking? We'll discuss it with Ethan." "So, you won't," her mother-in-law translated. "Fine, then I'll take care of the appetizers and the quiche. Can you bring bread? I can bring something else, if needed." "Bread will be sufficient," Eleanor said, with an intonation Olivia mentally classified as generous condescension. And Carol is coming with Kevin. Do you remember Kevin? Olivia didn't remember Kevin. This fact was shamelessly obvious, but she didn't want to admit it. Refresh my memory, she said diplomatically. Carol's son, 28, works at the bank. A good boy. Wonderful. He has a fiancée, Eleanor added. And in that last phrase, there was something Olivia couldn't yet decipher. The intonation was too neutral, and an overly neutral tone from her mother-in-law was like Arthur Sterling's quiet voice, an alarm bell. Congratulations to him, Olivia said. We'll see, Eleanor replied, and then hung up. Ethan emerged from the shower with a towel over his shoulders and found his wife studying the ceiling. Mom called, he guessed. I've been assigned bread. Meaning? My area of responsibility for dinner. Bread. Ethan paused for a second. I'll talk to her. No need. Olivia stood up. Bread it is. I'll get good bread. Olivia had seen Aunt Carol twice. At the wedding and at Eleanor's last New Year's dinner. Carol Reed, Eleanor's late husband's sister, was a lively, loud woman and, unlike her niece-in-law, completely genuine in her reactions. If she liked something, she praised it excessively. If she didn't keep quiet either, but at least she regretted it later. At the New Year's party, she told Olivia 3 times that she was smart and beautiful, and once, as she was leaving in her coat, whispered in her ear, "Hang in there, kiddo. Eleanor loves him. She just doesn't know how else to be." Olivia had smiled then, but she remembered. On Monday, she came to the newsroom and asked Leo, a 20-something intern with a perpetually open browser tab for some game he'd instantly minimize when Arthur appeared, to run blueprint innovations through open databases. Leo nodded with the air of someone who'd done this before. An hour later, he brought a printout. Blueprint Innovations LLC, registered 7 months ago, minimal capital stock. CEO and sole founder, Owen Turner, born 1989. Owen, Olivia read aloud. The name was one of those that stuck. I ran him too, Leo said with unexpected initiative. Nothing interesting. Worked for 2 other companies before this. Both now dissolved. Currently not officially employed anywhere except Blueprint Innovations. Registration address? An apartment. Modest neighborhood. Did you check the shoe outlet? Leo rubbed the back of his neck. That's an independent contractor renting the space. A different entity. The address just coincided. It seems to be used as a mailing address. That happens. Special firms sell addresses for shell corporations. I know. Olivia flipped through the printout. Thanks, Leo. That's all for now. Go hide your game. Leo smirked and left. Olivia called Ethan at lunch, briefly. Only to ask if everything was still on for Tuesday, Ethan confirmed. His voice was even, but Olivia detected an underlying tension, the kind that arises when a person has already made a decision but hasn't yet voiced it. Ethan, she said. Yeah? If Thorne says anything strange at the meeting, remember it verbatim. Don't interpret, don't analyze on the spot. Just remember his words. You sound like a coach before a big game. I sound like someone who needs to know what's going on. A pause. Do you trust me? Ethan asked, not offended, just asking. I trust you, Olivia replied. That's why I'm asking. That evening, at home, she opened her notebook and wrote a list of questions that troubled her. There were 7 points. Then she added an 8th, circled it, and put a question mark next to it. Why did Eleanor mention Kevin's fiancé in that particular tone? It might have nothing to do with Apex developments, Thorne, or the shoe outlet. Most likely, it didn't. But her nose didn't distinguish between professional and personal premonitions. It just signaled. And Olivia had learned to listen to it. Apex Development's office was on the 3rd floor of a corporate high-rise with a polished marble lobby, a concierge in a crisp suit, and mirrored elevators. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early, a habit he couldn't shake since college. Olivia asked him to text when he went in and when he came out. He texted both times. That was something. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. That evening, Ethan sat at the table and recounted it methodically, at Olivia's request, without interpretation, just the words. She listened and occasionally stopped him. Wait, Did he say exactly that? Thorne had greeted him warmly. A firm handshake, coffee brought without asking, simply placed before Ethan. The office was large, with renderings of completed projects on the walls. All beautiful, all clearly expensive. Professional photographers had taken those shots. They discussed the technical specifications quickly. Thorne agreed to all of Ethan's revisions, without haggling, which was strange in itself. Clients usually haggle, if only for show, otherwise it seems they came by their money too easily. And then Thorne said the following. Ethan reproduced it almost verbatim. Ethan, we have good rapport. I appreciate people who work cleanly and don't ask extraneous questions. It's rare in our business. I'd like to offer you the next project now, without waiting for the current one to finish. The terms will be better. Ethan thanked him, said he'd consider it. Thorne nodded calmly, without pressure. He handed over an envelope. Here are supplementary materials for the project. Take a look. Ethan placed the envelope on the table in front of Olivia. She didn't open it for another 5 minutes, just looked at it. Don't ask extraneous questions, she repeated finally. Yes. That wasn't a casual phrase. I understand. He was testing you, checking how amenable you were. Ethan paused. So, I wasn't paranoid about the payment scheme. No. Olivia finally took the envelope. You weren't paranoid. Inside was not the next project's proposal. It contained a printout of a property survey with a parcel ID, a lien-free certification, and a short, handwritten note. Construction approval expected in February. Design work to begin now. Olivia reread the note twice. February is next month, she said. I know, no permit yet, but he's already assigning design work, just like with the previous projects. Ethan, I didn't know about the previous projects. I know you didn't, she said without reproach. But now you do. The next day, she went to Arthur with the new information. The editor listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and paced his office. Twice. Hayes, I have a question. Listening. Can you work on this story, objectively? Honestly, I'm not sure. I like that answer, Arthur said unexpectedly. Because a person who is sure of their objectivity in such a situation is either lying or heartless. Neither option works for me. Work on it. But every step with me. Agreed. And one more thing, he stopped. Is your husband aware of what you're doing? He is. He's helping. He's honest with me. That's more important. Arthur nodded and returned to his desk. The conversation was over. On Wednesday, Olivia called the number Leo had found with the intonation of someone who had accomplished the impossible. Owen Turner's direct line, CEO of Blueprint Innovations. Leo hadn't explained how he got the number. Olivia didn't ask. Sometimes it was better not to know the mechanism if the result was honest. Turner answered after the third ring. Yes? Owen Turner, good morning. My name is Olivia. I'm with the Metropolitan Ledger. I'd like to ask a few questions about your company's operations. The pause was long enough to weigh a significant decision. Which company? He finally asked. Blueprint Innovations. Another pause. I'll call you back, Turner said and hung up. He didn't call back on Wednesday or Thursday. But on Thursday evening, Thorne texted Ethan, a short message. Ethan, I heard your wife works in the press. Hope this doesn't cause any inconvenience. Have a good evening. Ethan showed the message to Olivia silently. He knows, he said. He knew who you were married to from the beginning, Olivia replied calmly. That means the contract with your firm wasn't random. Ethan sat down, slowly, as one sits when the ground has shifted slightly. He hired me because I'm your husband, or because he thought it would complicate things for you if this story surfaced. Either you pressure your wife to bury the story, or she has a conflict of interest and steps back herself. Either way, he wins. Ethan searched for a word. Savvy, Olivia supplied. Unpleasant, but savvy. What now? Now you don't answer him until Monday. You let him wait, and we go to your mother's dinner on Saturday and pretend everything's fine. You can pretend everything's fine? I've been going to family dinners for 3 years, Olivia said. I've learned. Ethan unexpectedly laughed, quietly, but genuinely. The first time all week. "Olivia," he said. "I should have told you about the contract right away." "Yes. I'm sorry." She closed her notebook. "But from now on, know everything's fine when it's not. Agreed?" On Friday evening, she bought bread. 2 baguettes, white and whole wheat with caraway seeds, good bread from an artisanal bakery. Because if you're assigned bread, you bring the best possible bread. That was also a position. And on her phone, in a folder of work notes, there was already an audio file. She had recorded it on Wednesday, immediately after her conversation with Turner, her own retelling of everything she knew at that point. A habit. If something happened to her notebook, her voice would remain. Saturday morning arrived, as Saturdays usually do. Eleanor lived in an apartment that spoke of a different era, not in terms of dilapidation, but in terms of conviction. Everything stood where it was meant to stand, and hadn't moved in decades. A curio cabinet with crystal, a patterned rug hanging on the wall above the sofa. Photographs in frames, stern as official documents. Olivia rang the doorbell at 6 p.m. precisely, with the bread tucked under her arm. Ethan stood beside her. They hadn't spoken in the car, not because they were arguing, but because both were thinking the same thing and didn't want to voice it. Aunt Carol opened the door. "Olivia," she said, with that genuine joy that required no reason. "What kind of bread?" "With caraway seeds." "Eleanor, look, caraway seeds." Eleanor appeared from the kitchen in an apron, looked at the bread, and nodded reservedly as one accepts what is due. "Come in. Marcus is already here." Marcus sat in an armchair by the window with a mug of tea, talking to Kevin, a young man with a neat haircut and the gaze of someone accustomed to making a good impression and a little tired of it. Next to Kevin, on the sofa, sat a young woman, the fiancée, presumably petite, with a quiet face and hands folded on her lap, a little tenser than necessary for calm. "Brenda," Aunt Carol introduced her. Kevin's fiancée, smart and modest. Brenda smiled. Olivia smiled back and noticed Brenda's shoulders relax slightly, as if she had expected a different reaction. Sarah stood by the bookshelf, flipping through something. Seeing Olivia, she genuinely lit up, and they hugged. "How are you?" Sarah quietly asked. "Tough week." "I see. Will you tell me later?" "If there's a later." Sarah looked at her intently, with the professional gaze of a pediatrician who could read what wasn't said aloud, and nodded. Dinner was served at 8. The table was long, beautiful, clearly prepared over several days. Eleanor's appetizers were impeccable. Olivia admitted this honestly and without reservations. Aunt Carol brought a salad and a loud, cheerful mood. Marcus poured the wine. Kevin helped move plates, looking eager to be useful. The first half hour passed peacefully. They discussed the weather seriously, as if it were somehow to blame. Marcus's project, he'd taken a commission in another city, initially reluctant, then agreed. And how grocery prices were rising, seemingly forever. Eleanor was in her element at the table. She filled plates, offered food, moved dishes closer to her guests. This was the form of love she expressed best, feeding people. Olivia saw and appreciated it, as much as she could. Trouble began after the second course. Aunt Carol, kind, boisterous, unable to sense hidden tension, or perhaps able, but choosing not to notice, asked Brenda, "Sweetheart, what do you do?" "I work on a farm," Brenda said. "Just an animal scientist, and I help with the general farm work. It's a family business." "That's good," Aunt Carol approved. "Land is the foundation." The table grew a little quieter. Olivia felt it, a quietness not of sound, but of a change in the air's density. She looked at Eleanor. Her mother-in-law held her wine glass, looking at Brenda. Her face wore the expression that always preceded a statement she had no intention of holding back. "Kevin," Eleanor pronounced slowly, "you said you were looking for a serious girl." "Mom," Kevin said, with a slight warning in his voice, "I'm just talking." Her mother-in-law set down her glass. "My nephew is a banking professional. That implies a certain level, certain expectations." "Eleanor," Aunt Carol said softly. "Carol, don't interrupt." Eleanor straightened up. "I'm a mother. I have the right to speak my mind." "That right is not disputed," Olivia interjected evenly. The question is, what exactly is on your mind? Eleanor looked at her. Olivia held her gaze, and then something in her mother-in-law, a kind of valve she had kept closed for a long, long time, opened. Exactly, Eleanor said, her voice a little louder, a little more significant. What's on my mind? What's on my mind is that the men in this family are too kind, too easily agreeable. She swept her gaze around the table. My son dreamed of a princess. I know what he dreamed of. And he got a farm girl. Silence fell on the table like something heavy. No one moved. Kevin stared at his plate. Aunt Carol opened her mouth and closed it. Marcus slowly lowered his mug. Sarah remained still. Brenda became very quiet. Kevin seemed to stop breathing. Olivia didn't cry. She didn't do anything for a second, 2, 3. She just sat with a very calm face. Then she took out her phone, found the right file, pressed play, and Eleanor Reed's voice filled the room. The recording had been made recently. Olivia hadn't planned to use it. She hadn't even thought of it as a weapon. The phone had simply been lying nearby when her mother-in-law called on Sunday, and at the end of the conversation, thinking Olivia had already taken the phone from her ear, had said to Carol a few clear, detailed phrases about how Ethan deserved a different life, how this journalist only thought about her articles, how there was no order in the house, no children, no prospects. The recording lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Eleanor sprang up almost immediately, reaching for the phone, but Olivia moved her hand calmly, without a jerk, simply shifting the phone to her other side. The guests listened in silence. Aunt Carol looked at Eleanor. Marcus stared at the table. Sarah held her back straight. Brenda became very quiet. Kevin seemed not to breathe. When the recording ended, there was such silence at the table that the clock ticking in the hallway was audible. Ethan stood up. He didn't look at Olivia, didn't look at the guests. He looked at his mother, long and directly. Eleanor looked back with the expression of someone expecting either forgiveness or an explosion. Ethan said one word, enough. Not loudly, not with a tremor, just enough. Like placing a period at the end of the last sentence. Eleanor clutched her heart, literally pressing her palm to her chest, and sank back into her chair. Aunt Carol was the first to react. Eleanor! She jumped up, walked around the table. Eleanor, breathe. Sarah, look at her. Sarah had already risen, professionally, quickly, without fuss. Olivia put her phone in her pocket, stood up, took her glass, and went to the kitchen to get water. Just water, because she needed to leave the room for a minute, and that was the only decent way to do it. In the kitchen, she stood by the sink and listened to the voices beyond the wall. Sarah's steady voice, Aunt Carol's quiet tones, and Ethan's silence, which she could hear even through the wall. She didn't need her nose to understand that something in this family had just changed. Irreversibly, and possibly for the better, though that wasn't certain. Sarah quickly and professionally examined Eleanor. Pulse, blood pressure, overall appearance. She delivered her verdict, calmly. Mild hypertensive crisis, nothing threatening, but she needs to lie down and not worry. I can't not worry, Eleanor said in a weak voice. The voice was weak, but the words were clear. Then it's not so bad, is it? You can, Sarah replied. It's a matter of practice. Aunt Carol led Eleanor to the bedroom. Kevin helped carry a glass of water, looking relieved to have some task. Brenda quietly cleared plates. No one asked her. She just started, and it was a delicate gesture. Marcus went out to the balcony. Ethan followed. Olivia stayed in the kitchen. She poured herself tea she didn't want and stood by the window, holding the mug with both hands. Through the wall, she could hear Aunt Carol saying something quiet and lengthy to Eleanor. Eleanor didn't reply, or replied very softly. Sarah appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later. She'll live, she said, pouring herself water. She's healthy, Olivia. Just her blood pressure spiked from stress. I know. You're not to blame. I know that too. Sarah looked at her without judgment, without excessive sympathy. Farm girl. She said it deliberately. Olivia said. Brenda is an animal scientist. Eleanor heard that. For her, there's no difference. Agriculture means lower class. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a position. Yes, Sarah agreed. I noticed, and Brenda noticed. That's why she's now washing someone else's dishes in someone else's kitchen, because she doesn't know how else to cope with what she heard. They fell silent. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Kevin paced back and forth with a useless preoccupation. Ethan handled himself well, Sarah said. Yes, you too. I just pressed a button. Olivia. Sarah put down her glass. Just pressing a button at that moment, in that silence, with those people at the table, that's not easy. I'm a pediatrician. I know how to assess the cost of appearing calm. Olivia didn't reply, but something in her loosened slightly, barely noticeably, like exhaling after holding her breath for a long time. Ethan and Marcus returned from the balcony. Marcus was serious. Ethan was composed, like a man who had made a decision and was simply carrying it out. How is she? Ethan asked. Fine, Sarah replied. She'll take a taxi home, not drive, and a checkup with her doctor tomorrow. Ethan nodded, looked at Olivia. She looked back. No words were needed. They both understood that this evening would have consequences, and that those consequences would begin not tomorrow, but already now, simply not yet visible. The guests departed by 10. Aunt Carol was the last to leave, hugging Olivia tightly at the door, without words. She just whispered in her ear, "You did the right thing. It was long overdue," and left. Olivia and Ethan washed dishes in silence, shoulder to shoulder. As they did every evening, he washed, she dried. It was one of those habits that formed naturally, and about which they didn't speak, because they simply existed. I should have talked to her a long time ago, Ethan said finally. I avoided it. I know it's cowardice. It's not cowardice, Olivia said. It's love with inconvenient consequences. You didn't want to hurt her. She hurt you. She angered me, Olivia corrected. That's a bit different. Ethan handed her a plate. She called you a farm girl, in front of everyone. She called Brenda a farm girl. I was collateral damage. That's not better. No, but I'll survive. Olivia put the plate in the cupboard. I'm more concerned about Brenda. The girl came to dinner with her future mother-in-law, or whatever Eleanor Reed is to Kevin, and she got that. First time, or not? I don't know. We need to ask Kevin. Ask him. She paused. And tomorrow, you go to her. To Mom's. Alone. Talk normally, humanly. Don't argue, don't make excuses. Just tell her it's not okay. Directly and calmly. Ethan was silent for a few seconds. And you? And I'll deal with Thorne on Sunday, because Monday is the deadline. Sunday morning, while Ethan drove to his mother's, Olivia opened her laptop and began to systematize everything she knew. It helped. It didn't solve the problem, but it gave the illusion of control. And sometimes, the illusion of control was the first step toward real control. The scheme was as follows. Apex Developments obtained construction permits, presumably through an intermediary in the relevant authorities. Before receiving permits, money was transferred through Blueprint Innovations to contractors. Contractors received advances and began work. If the permit was not issued, the money was already spent, and the trail went cold. If it was issued, everything looked like normal schedule optimization. Elegant, almost legal. Almost. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Yes, Olivia Hayes. A male voice. Cautious. This is Turner. Owen, you called me this week. Olivia straightened. I remember. I'm ready to talk, Turner said. But not over the phone, and not at the ledger office. Do you know that cafe on Main Street Square? The gray building, second floor? I know it. Tomorrow, 11 a.m., come alone. Olivia looked out the window. A January morning, gray and honest. I'll be there, she said. Turner hung up. She wrote the time in her notebook, circled it, and put a star next to it. Then she thought and added a second star. Because a person who had been silent for a week and then called himself on Sunday morning was either very scared or very determined. And both meant something had changed. Ethan returned from his mother's at 3, undressed in the hallway, and walked into the kitchen. His face was tired, but not dark, like after a difficult but necessary conversation. How was it? Olivia asked. We talked, he said. She cried. Did you? A pause. A little. Olivia stood, poured him tea. Did she understand? I don't know. But she heard. Ethan took the mug. This is different. This is a beginning, Olivia said. Tomorrow at 11, Turner. So, the weekend's over. The cafe on Main Street Square was called the Loft Cafe because it occupied the second floor of a gray building with wooden beams on the ceiling and windows overlooking the bustling market below. On Monday morning, the market was operating at half capacity. It was January, cold, and there were few customers. Vendors in puffer coats stood behind their stalls with the air of people who had come to terms with circumstances but had not lost their dignity. Olivia arrived at 10:50, ordered coffee, and chose a table by the far wall, not by the window, not in plain sight, but with a good view of the entrance. A professional habit, almost automatic. Turner arrived at exactly 11. She recognized him immediately, not because she had seen him before, but because he entered exactly as people who are nervous and trying to hide it do. Too straight, too confident, with slightly more control over every movement than necessary. Owen Turner was a short man in his early 30s, slender, with dark circles under his eyes and hands he immediately put in his pockets, presumably so no one would see they weren't entirely steady. He was neatly dressed, but without pretense. His jacket was good, but not new. He sat opposite her, ordered tea from the approaching waitress, and waited for her to leave. "Are you alone?" he asked. As promised. "Good." He looked at her notebook. "I don't want you to record this. I can put away my notebook. But I'm a journalist, Owen. Everything you say will remain in my head. That's an honest warning." Turner looked at her, then at the notebook, then back at her. "Put it away," he said. She put the notebook in her bag, placed her phone on the table face down. Turner glanced at the phone. "It's for texts," Olivia said. "You can check. I trust you. Then speak." Turner held his tea mug with both hands, for warmth and to keep his hands occupied. "I've been working for Thorne for 3 years," he began. First, directly at Apex Developments. Then he suggested a separate scheme. Said it was more convenient, that it was standard practice. I agreed. I was 32. I'd just been rejected for a second mortgage, and I was offered good money to be listed as the director of a company and sign whatever they told me to. Blueprint Innovations. Yes. He took a sip. I understood it wasn't entirely clean, but I didn't understand how much. I thought it was just optimization. Everyone does it, he'd say. It's nothing, he'd say. And it turned out. Turner put down his mug. About $40 million passed through Blueprint Innovations in 6 months. Contractors received advances, started digging, bringing in materials. On 3 out of 6 projects, construction permits were never issued. Contractors were left with debts because they had already spent the advances. Part of the money went to other entities I never saw. I only saw the incoming and outgoing through my company. You understand this is fraud. I understand. His voice was even, but there was something in it Olivia couldn't immediately name. Then she did. The weariness of a man who had long realized he was trapped, but had spent too long convincing himself he wasn't quite there yet. "Why now?" she asked. "Why did you call me now?" Turner paused, put down his mug, aligned it with the edge of the saucer. "Because last week, Thorne called me in. Said that if an audit started, all the documents were set up so the responsibility lay with Blueprint Innovations, which means, with me. Legally, I'm the director and founder. I signed everything. Thorne doesn't figure directly in this chain anywhere. And you realized he prepared an exit? I realized I am his exit." Turner looked out the window. Below, a market vendor in an orange puffer coat was explaining something to a customer, gesticulating actively. "For 3 years, I thought we were partners. It turns out I was a liability policy." Olivia looked at him. A young man with dark circles under his eyes, who 3 years ago had agreed to easy money for a simple task. She had heard many such stories. They always began the same way and ended differently, depending on when the person decided to stop. "Do you have documents?" she asked. "Copies?" "Not everything, but enough." He picked up the mug again. "I made copies a year ago, just in case. Didn't know why then. Intuition is a useful thing. It worked late, but it worked." Olivia leaned slightly forward. "Owen, I need to be direct with you. I'm a journalist, not an investigator. What you tell me can become material for publication. This can help you, because a person who comes forward and tells their story is in a different position than one who is found. But it also means everything will become public. Are you ready for that? Turner was silent for a long time. During that time, the waitress brought someone else's order. The door at the entrance rattled shut, and the market vendor in the orange puffer coat, judging by the sounds from below, had sold something after all, and was pleased. "I'm ready," he said finally, "because the quiet option is no longer available to me." "Good, then we need a meeting with the documents. And, preferably your lawyer." "I don't have a lawyer." "Find one by Friday." "This is important. You're coming to this story not just as a source. You're coming as someone with legal interests. Protect them first." Turner looked at her with an expression Olivia had seen on people who didn't expect such advice from a journalist. "Aren't you afraid I'll get scared and leave?" "I am afraid," she said honestly. "But if you leave because I advised you to get a lawyer, then you're not ready. And an unready source is a problem for both of us." They sat for another 40 minutes. Turner spoke cautiously at first, then in more detail. Olivia listened and didn't interrupt. Sometimes she clarified briefly, with a single word or a glance. The journalist's toolkit: let the person talk while they're talking. The scheme turned out to be even more elegant than Olivia had assumed. Apex Developments signed contracts with real contractors. Advances went through Blueprint Innovations, supposedly to speed up payments. Part of the sum honestly reached the contractor. Another part settled in entities Turner only knew by name, and not even all of them. On paper, everything looked like legitimate transactions between legal entities. To prove fraud, one would need to trace the entire chain, and that was the work of an investigator with appropriate authority, not a journalist. "I can't publicly prove the scheme," Olivia said as they were preparing to leave, "but I can ask enough right questions for those who can, to get involved." "Thorne has connections," Turner said quietly. "Everywhere, quite extensive." "I already suspected that." Olivia put on her jacket. "That's why a lawyer is important. And that's why the documents need to appear simultaneously in several places." Turner nodded. At the door, he stopped. "Your husband," he said. "He didn't know." "I know." Thorne spoke of him as a tool. That a journalist wife was either a problem or a resource, depending on how you spun it. "He decided she was a resource," Olivia said. "Yes, he thought through your husband. He could either find out what you were digging up or create a conflict of interest for you. Neither worked out." "I see," Turner said, and for the first time in the entire conversation, something like respect appeared in his voice. They walked out onto the street. Turner went one way, Olivia the other. The January air was crisp and honest. She arrived at the newsroom by 1. Arthur Sterling sat in his office, looking at his monitor with the air of someone reading something unpleasant. "Hayes," he said, without looking away. "Sit down." She sat, recounted her meeting with Turner, from memory, in detail, without a notebook. Arthur listened, stirring his coffee. "No sugar, just the spoon, a habit." When she finished, he put down the spoon. "Source is ready to provide documents. Gets a lawyer by Friday. Then, yes, it will take time. The publication won't come out before next week. I understand. The piece needs to be carefully constructed. No direct accusations, just facts and questions. Thorne is a wealthy man and surely has lawyers who know how to deal with media outlets." "I know. That's why every word goes through you." "Agreed." Arthur stood, walked to the window. "What about your husband? He's supposed to respond to Thorne today. We discussed it. What will he say?" "That the contract for the next project cannot be accepted due to the firm's workload." Politely, without explanation. "That's correct." Arthur turned around. "Olivia, one more question. When all this is over, will you write a piece about your husband working with Thorne?" She looked at him. "Is it important for the story?" "It's important for the story's honesty." The pause was short. "I'll write one paragraph. Facts. Nothing extra." "Good." Arthur nodded. "Go to work." Ethan called at 3 p.m. He had briefly texted Thorne. Thorne replied 10 minutes later, politely, without pressure. "Understand. Good luck with your projects." 3 extra words. A man who texts "good luck with your projects" With such speed, either has already found another tool or knows something Ethan doesn't. Are you tense? Olivia asked. A little. A pause. How was your meeting? Productive. I'll tell you tonight. Good. And, Olivia. Mom called me. What did she say? She wants to talk to you herself, without me. This was unexpected. Not in the sense of unbelievable, but in the sense of sooner than anticipated. Eleanor Reed was a person for whom admissions were difficult. If she called herself and asked for a meeting, it meant Sunday's conversation with Ethan had been more serious than he had let on. When does she want to? Olivia asked. Tomorrow evening, if you're not opposed. Not opposed. She put away her phone and opened her laptop. She began to sketch out the structure of the article, without names for now. Just the logic, what led to what. It helped her think. Text on a screen was thoughts that could no longer be forgotten. An hour later, Leo came in, with an expression that meant, I found something, but I'm not sure how important it is. Olivia Hayes, I was looking into the construction permits for those projects that went through Blueprint Innovations. Found one interesting detail. Tell me. For 2 of the projects where permits weren't issued, the rejections were signed by the same inspector. Different districts, different agencies, but the signature is one. Olivia looked up from the screen. Name? Inspector David Wallace. I checked him out. He's been in that position for 3 years. Before that, he worked. Leo looked at his phone. At a private consulting firm. The firm was dissolved 2 years ago. The firm had 3 founders. One of them, Julian Thorne. Olivia looked at Leo. Leo looked at Olivia. Leo, she said finally, you're a good journalist. Leo blushed with the speed only 20-year-olds could manage. I was just looking in the database. That's exactly what's called work. She gestured toward his notebook. Write down everything you found. Dates, sources, links, in detail. This is no longer just a construction scheme. This is a potential corruption chain. Got it. And Leo, don't tell anyone, not even colleagues, not even Arthur Sterling. I'll tell Arthur myself. Go. Leo left. Olivia closed her laptop, leaned back in her chair, and looked at the ceiling. The case, which began as a story about a questionable contract with her husband's client, was turning into something bigger and more meticulously structured. Julian Thorne wasn't just a businessman with unscrupulous habits. He was a man who built systems slowly, patiently, with emergency exits at every level, which in itself demanded respect. Professional, cold, devoid of sympathy. She took out her notebook and wrote a 9th point on the list she had kept from the beginning. Wallace, the link. Who's next? Outside the newsroom, it was getting dark. January nights fell early and without warning. Eleanor opened the door herself, before Olivia had a chance to ring the bell, apparently waiting at the threshold. This was eloquent in itself. Come in, she said. Not please, step inside, but a simple, come in. The first time in 3 years. The apartment smelled of apple pie. Olivia wasn't sure if it was accidental or planned, but decided to assume it was planned. It was fairer to both of them. They sat in the kitchen. Eleanor poured tea, placed a cup in front of Olivia, and moved a plate with sliced pie closer. Apple pie. She did all of this methodically and without words, like a person who needed to occupy her hands while gathering her courage. Olivia waited. I don't know how to apologize, Eleanor finally said. Her voice was even, but it held a particular firmness that arises when a person has decided in advance not to retreat, no matter what. I never have. That's true, and I don't hide it. I hear you, Olivia said. But what I said on Saturday, it was wrong. Her mother-in-law looked up, not just because Ethan was upset, but because it was wrong in principle. I spoke about you in a way one shouldn't speak about another person, especially in front of others. Olivia held her cup with both hands, not interrupting. You work, you think. You didn't abandon your husband when he got into trouble, which Eleanor paused, still don't fully understand, but Ethan explained it to me in general terms. She paused again. And there are no children not because you don't want them. I made that up for myself, because it's easier to be angry than to wait. This was unexpected, not the topic. Olivia had anticipated that. The precision was unexpected. When Eleanor decided to be honest, she could be very precise. "We want children," Olivia said calmly. "It just hasn't happened yet. It's not a topic for a dinner party." "No," her mother-in-law agreed. "Not a topic." They fell silent. Outside the window, a light snow was falling, quiet, unpretentious. "That recording," Eleanor began. "Yes." "Did you make it on purpose?" "No," Olivia answered honestly. "The phone was next to me and recording. I didn't plan to use it, but on Saturday, I decided I had to." Eleanor looked into her cup. "I said those things to Carol. I thought only to her." "I know. And you still used it." "Yes." Olivia didn't make excuses, because it was the only way to stop what was happening at the table without creating a scene. "I didn't want to shout. I didn't want to cry. I wanted everyone to hear what you say about me behind closed doors and compare it to what you said aloud. It wasn't revenge, it was a mirror." A long pause. "Harsh," Eleanor said. "Yes, but softer than it could have been." Something in her mother-in-law's face, that particular tight knot Olivia had come to consider an inherent part of her expression over 3 years, loosened slightly. It didn't disappear, but it shifted. "Carol told me," Eleanor said slowly, "that I'm afraid. That it's all fear. That Ethan will finally grow up, and I'll become unneeded." "You are needed," Olivia said. "You're simply his mother. That's not a position you can gain or lose." Eleanor looked at her for a long time, as one looks at something one hasn't yet decided to trust, but can no longer ignore. "I'll try," she finally said. "I will too," Olivia replied. It wasn't peace. It was a truce with the intent to move forward, but an honest truce without hidden conditions. For a start, it was quite enough. The pie was good. On Friday, Turner sent a message. "Lawyer found. Documents ready. Meeting possible anytime." Olivia replied. Saturday morning, the Ledger office. Arthur Sterling received the news silently, just a nod. Then he said, "Hayes, we need a lawyer on our side." "Already arranged. Attorney Susan Davies, remember? She helped us with that case 2 years ago." "I remember." "Good." Arthur adjusted his perpetually unbuttoned second button, fastening it, which happened extremely rarely, and, in Olivia's observation, signified complete concentration. "So, Saturday we put everything together." "Everything together," she confirmed. The Saturday meeting at the Ledger office lasted 3 hours. Turner brought a real, thick folder, unlike the thin one with which everything had begun. Documents, payment orders, selected correspondence, but convincing. Turner's lawyer, a young woman with a business haircut and a habit of speaking in short, complete sentences, immediately stated her client's position: cooperation, in exchange for recognition of mitigating circumstances. Attorney Susan Davies, older and unhurried, listened, took notes, and once said, "That's interesting," in a tone that made Turner's hands tremble slightly. Arthur Sterling, at the end of the meeting, delivered a short monologue, quietly, which meant he was pleased, but serious. "The story will run on Wednesday. It will be based on documents and will ask questions, not deliver judgment. In parallel, these materials will go to the relevant authorities. That's not our job, but we will not impede it." "Turner, do you understand what will happen after publication?" "I understand," Turner said, without hesitation. The weariness in his voice hadn't disappeared, but something new had emerged beneath it, the kind that people have when they've made a decision that is both terrifying and right. "Good, then let's work." The article ran on Wednesday. It was simply titled, "Questions for Apex Developments." No judgments, no loud words. Only facts, figures, documented discrepancies, and questions correct, precise, uncomfortable. Questions for which Julian Thorne had no good answers. At the end of the article, Olivia wrote one paragraph stating that during the course of the investigation, it was discovered that a contract with Apex Developments had been held by an architectural firm whose principal was her husband, that her husband was unaware of the scheme, and that the contract had been terminated. Arthur read the paragraph, said nothing, and included it in the article without changes. By Wednesday evening, the Ledger received a query from Apex Development's lawyers demanding a retraction. Attorney Susan Davies responded to them on Thursday morning, methodically and without superfluous words. On Thursday, Marcus called, not for business, just to ask how she was. It was characteristic of Marcus to sense when to call and not ask too many questions. "Fine," Olivia said, and was surprised herself by how true it was. "Good piece you got," Marcus said. "I read it, Sarah too. Thanks. Listen." He paused with that silence of his that meant something pondered. "Kevin wants to talk to you. No rush. He's just worried about Brenda, about how things went on Saturday." "Tell him to call," Olivia said. "Everything's fine. Brenda is a good girl. He knows. That's why he's worried." After the call, Olivia went out onto the balcony. January was nearing its end. In the air, there was that subtle shift that wasn't yet spring, but not entirely winter either. A promise, nothing more, but a promise also meant something. Ethan came out after her with 2 mugs of coffee, standing beside her. "How are you?" he asked. "Thinking," she said. "About what?" "About how all this started with a family dinner and a construction company, and turned out to be about something else." "About what?" Olivia took her mug. "About how people hide what they're afraid to name." Thorne hid his scheme behind glossy renderings. Eleanor hid her fear behind harsh words. Owen hid what he knew behind the conviction that it wasn't his problem. And us? We hid our fatigue from each other. You from me about the contract. Me from you about how your mother's dinners get to me. Ethan was silent. "And now?" "Now we stop hiding," Olivia said. "It's not complicated. We just need to agree." He hugged her with one arm, not impulsively, but as one holds something important. They stood on the balcony in the January air with coffee that had cooled slightly and looked at the city living its ordinary life, with all its schemes, secrets, family dinners, and reconciliations. Her phone vibrated. Olivia looked at the screen. Eleanor Reed. A short message, unusually short for her. "Apple pie in the fridge. Pick it up when you're in the neighborhood." Olivia showed Ethan. He read it, chuckled quietly, warmly. "She means she tried," he explained. "I know," Olivia said. She texted back, "We'll pick it up Sunday." 3 seconds later, "good" arrived. One word, but the right one. Her nose wasn't just for work. Sometimes it just said, "Everything will be fine here." Not immediately, not without effort, but it will be. Olivia put away her phone, took her mug with both hands, and looked at the city. Somewhere, in the corporate high-rise, with a polished marble lobby, Julian Thorne was reading the Ledger article and talking with his lawyers. Somewhere in a modest neighborhood, Owen Turner, born 1989, was drinking tea and probably sleeping a little better than a week ago. Somewhere, Aunt Carol was likely recounting this story with her characteristic loudness and precision. And Brenda, quiet, smart Brenda, would go to work tomorrow on her farm, to the land that was the foundation. Eleanor Reed could think whatever she wanted about that, but Olivia thought it was good that such people existed. "Let's go warm up," Ethan said. "Let's?" Olivia agreed. The balcony door closed. Beyond the glass, the January evening remained, calm, gray, honest. A most ordinary evening, after which the next day arrives. And that, if you think about it, is quite a lot. Epilogue. 3 months later, April arrived belatedly. First, it pretended it was still March for a long time, then threw up its hands and immediately delivered warmth, greenery, and that special urban vivacity when people go outside for no reason, simply because they can. Olivia learned the results on Monday morning, not from an official source, but from attorney Susan Davies, who called at 8 a.m. and said, in her characteristic short sentences, "Charges filed. Thorne, named as a defendant. Wallace, too. Turner is a witness, all correct." Olivia said thank you, hung up, and finished her coffee. Arthur Sterling buttoned his second button that day from early morning. Kevin and Brenda got married in late March, quietly, without fanfare, with a small group. Olivia and Ethan were invited. Eleanor Reed was also present, sitting upright in her best suit. And when Brenda approached her after the ceremony, Eleanor stood and said softly, "You're a good girl." "I'm sorry for that evening." Brenda simply replied, "It's already forgotten." It wasn't true, of course, but it was a kind untruth, one of those that help people move on. Aunt Carol cried at the wedding with such sincerity that she infected half the room. Marcus stoically held on until the toast, after which he too teared up and pretended it was the champagne. Leo received his first byline on a small note about the continuation of the Apex Developments case. His text and Olivia's combined. Arthur Sterling said pretty solid, which on his scale of evaluations roughly corresponded to excellent. Leo walked around with this pretty solid for 3 days and didn't open his game in the browser once during that time. Almost. Reed and Associates took a new contract in April, a small but honest renovation of an old building downtown. Ethan showed Olivia the sketches on Sunday evening, spreading the sheets directly on the kitchen table over their unfinished dinner. "Here, I want to create an inner courtyard," he said, tracing with his pencil. "Right now, it's a blank wall. But if we remove this and move that over here, it will create a space where people will want to linger." Olivia looked at the sketch, at the lines in which he saw what wasn't there yet, but should be. "It will work," she said. He looked at her with the expression of someone who trusts unconditionally. "Are you just saying that?" "No. You make space better. That's a fact. Still can't hammer a shelf straight." "I'll hammer the shelf," Olivia said. On Sunday, they stopped by Eleanor's. Not for any particular reason, just because, which in itself was news. Her mother-in-law opened the door, saw them, silently turned, and went to the kitchen to put on the kettle. It meant she was glad to see them. She just didn't know how else to express it, but she was trying. Over tea, they talked about various things. About Kevin and Brenda. About Marcus's project in the other city. He had finally left for 3 months. Sarah was holding up stoically and called him every evening. About how spring had arrived late this year, but with conviction. Eleanor was silent more than she spoke, but this silence was different, not the tense kind from which something sharp could drop at any moment, just quiet, present. As they left, Olivia took a container from the refrigerator. Her mother-in-law had packed something for them, as always, without asking. "Eleanor," Olivia said in the hallway, "your apple pie with caraway seeds is the best I've ever tasted." Her mother-in-law looked at her for a second, checking for irony. There was no irony. "The recipe is simple," she finally said. "I'll show you sometime." It was the first sometime without a hidden agenda. On the balcony that evening, Olivia opened her notebook, the one with Arthur's inscription on the first page. She flipped through it, found the list of questions she had written in January. 9 points, then a few more added along the way, all closed. She thought for a second and wrote at the end, on a separate line, unnumbered. Sometimes the most convoluted question is solved not by an answer, but by a conversation. She closed the notebook. The April evening was long and undeservedly pleasant. Somewhere below, people walked, with their own stories, convoluted, unresolved, in progress. The city lived as it knew how, loudly, messily, authentically. Olivia placed her mug on the railing and thought, not bad. Everything turned out not bad. Her nose agreed. "Thank you for staying with us until the end. It's important and valuable. And a question for you, did Olivia do the right thing by playing the recording at the table, or was it too much?"